Oh my god. I actually did it. I got all 7 Chaos Emeralds. I can play as Super Sonic now. What do you mean there are 14 Emeralds now? What's Hypersonic? Oh, son of a bitch. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Golden Bolt. Today we're going to finish our Sonic Genesis Marathon with Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Where do you go after creating 2 massive back-to-back successes? Well, obviously you go and change everything, right? In what would later become known as a Sonic Team Special, STI and Sonic Team decided at first that they wanted to make Sonic 3 a radically different game for no particular reason. An isometric 3D game similar to what ended up becoming Sonic 3D Blast. Unlike the Sonic Team Special, they didn't stick with this random idea, realizing that it was kinda stupid to fix what wasn't broken. So instead, again led by Naka and Yasuhara, the team worked to refine the gameplay of Sonic even further and create the ultimate Sonic game, something far bigger than either of the previous 2 outings. They planned this massive blow-off to the Sonic trilogy, but development costs piled up and there was no way to fit all that was planned onto a single cartridge without blowing the budget even more. So they figured out a way to split the game in 2, releasing Sonic 3 in February of 1994 and releasing the second half as Sonic and Knuckles in October of that same year. The Sonic and Knuckles cartridge is actually pretty unique in that if you open the top, there's a slot where you can lock in another Sega Genesis game. For most games when you lock it in, it'll just give you a randomized special stage from Sonic 3, but if you put in Sonic 2, you can play as Knuckles in Sonic 2's stages. However, this was made for one game and one game only, and that is Sonic 3, so if you lock the games in as so, I'm going to try not to break it here, you get the complete version of Sonic 3 as it was intended on one cartridge, Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Before we continue, let's address the elephant in the room. Sonic 3's soundtrack was composed in part by Michael Jackson. The King of Pop, being a fan of the Blue Hedgehog, offered to compose Sonic 3, and you just don't turn down that kind of offer. He worked with his production crew for about a month on the music for significant chunks of the game. According to some on his production team, he wasn't satisfied at all with how it sounded when compressed to fit on a Genesis cartridge. However, in the summer of 1993, Jackson was brought into a public lawsuit over child molestation charges. For one or both of these reasons, Jackson's name was never attached publicly to the project. The rest of his team was credited for their contributions, however, as well as a composer who was tasked with replacing any sign of Jackson in the game's music. According to Sega, depending on who you ask, either Jackson never had any involvement or everything was replaced from scratch. But the people who worked with Jackson and the replacement composer insist that most of Jackson's work made it into the game. Either way, it's a neat little tidbit in gaming history, that's for sure. Third verse, same as well, no it's not, it's kinda different. Remember how we destroyed the Death Egg at the end of Sonic 2? Well, this game takes place immediately after that, with Sonic and Tails flying over to the crash site on the mysterious Angel Island. Sonic bumps into this new red echidna named Knuckles, who is somehow strong enough to knock Sonic out of his super state. And that is the strongest we will ever see Knuckles be. That's his peak. He peaked right there in his first 3 seconds. Knuckles then steals the Chaos Emeralds, seemingly working as Eggman's minion here. The adventure in Sonic 3 focuses on reclaiming the Chaos Emeralds, getting past Knuckles, and stopping Eggman from repairing the Death Egg, which they do, and the Death Egg crashes somewhere else on Angel Island. This is where the Sonic and Knuckles portion of the story starts, with Sonic and Tails continuing their push to stop Robotnik. Eventually, at Hidden Palace Zone, Sonic fights and defeats Knuckles, and Eggman reveals the endgame to his plan. Eggman steals the Master Emerald, the gem Knuckles had been guarding with his life, which gives Angel Island its power. Knuckles realizes he's been duped, tricked by Eggman into thinking that Sonic was the one that was going to steal the emerald. So Knuckles teams up with Sonic and Tails, taking them to a teleporter disguised sanctuary, the location of the Death Egg's new launch base. Sonic enters the Death Egg, destroys it from the inside, and then transforms into Super Sonic and fights Eggman one final time in space. If you got all the Chaos Emeralds, that is. If you didn't, the game just ends. That's not all though, as Knuckles has his own storyline too when you choose him, acting as an epilogue to Sonic's story. I didn't record much of this, but it's a nice little bonus that encourages a second playthrough. This is the first time in the Sonic series where we see a concerted effort at storytelling, and while I'm not going to rate it just to be fair to the previous 2 games, this really works, and it works well enough that I don't think Sonic games have ever reached this peak narratively again. I'm sure that's going to sound stupid to some of you Sonic fans out there, but Sonic 3 and Knuckles is subtle. It doesn't go above and beyond to try to be deep, you see the story progress from within the levels. When I'm in Lava Reef and I see the Death Egg protruding out of the caverns, holy shit, that's menacing. I did that. It's not the moon being blown up, it's not a time paradox or 7, it's tangible evidence that I as a player had an impact on this world. I didn't expect this, it just works. Let's just get this out of the way. Sonic 3 and Knuckles has the best core gameplay of the 2D Sonic games, not just on the Genesis, period. One could also argue that it has the best core gameplay of the entire Sonic franchise, but I'm not going to count my flickies before they hatch. Take everything I said about Sonic 2's mechanics and throw in tons of small but incredibly significant improvements, and that's Sonic 3. For example, you now have some form of defense in midair with Sonic's new Insta-Shield. By pressing the jump button again in midair, Sonic will spin, creating a little air shield thing to block projectiles or damage enemies. I didn't mention this in my Sonic 1 or Sonic 2 reviews for a reason, and that's because this has been a persistent problem that I don't ever think about until I get to Sonic 3. All the time I would get hit in midair because all I can do is land and hope I land safely. Now I at least have a chance, and this move empowers me. It pushes me to take risks, to play faster, and it makes the hits that I take feel more warranted as a result. This is complemented by what I feel is slightly more fair enemy placement and much more fair enemy design. Now that I have the Insta-Shield, I don't really have any specific complaints about enemies. However, Sonic can't use the Insta-Shield all the time, as it goes inactive if he has any power-up at all, be it Super Sonic, an invincibility power-up, or any of the 3 new elemental shields. And these are what really take Sonic 3 above and beyond. Sprinkled throughout the levels are these 3 special shields, water, fire, and thunder. Shouldn't it be electricity since, thunder it's not a lightning bolt? Each one has a unique midair attack to replace the Insta-Shield and a passive ability. For example, with the water shield, you can bounce on the ground to try and reach areas that were previously too high up for Sonic, and he can also breathe underwater forever, so you don't have to worry about the fire shield gives you a mid-air boost, sort of like a non-homing attack, and it makes you immune to fire. The thunder shield gives you a sweet double jump and attracts rings to you like a magnet. These all add an incredible variety to the gameplay possibilities and encourage exploring even more than either of the previous 2 games. While Tails and Knuckles can use the elemental shields, they can't use Sonic's Insta-Shield. Instead, each has his own unique ability. Tails can now fly because for some reason he couldn't in Sonic 2, and this makes him the game's easy mode. Knuckles can go through the air and climb up walls by manipulating air currents under his dreadlocks. To counteract this, Knuckles has the lowest jump of the 3. Each character has secrets hidden for him, unique paths, the works. It's wonderful. Special stages return, but yet again they're totally different, both in terms of their gameplay and how to access them. You take control of your character of choice in these 3D mini-globes, and your goal is to run through all of the blue spheres. Red spheres knock you right out of the special stage, bumper spheres will knock you backwards, normally into a red sphere, and if you surround all of the blue spheres in a section, it'll turn all of the ones inside to rings for you. If you get all 7 emeralds in Sonic 3's side, when you start Sonic and Knuckles, you'll start trying to collect the Super Emeralds, upgraded versions of the Chaos Emeralds. Get all 7 of those, and Sonic can become Hyper Sonic, Knuckles can become Hyper Knuckles, and Tails can become Super Tails, all of which are essentially God mode. Thought Super Sonic was overkill? You ain't seen nothing yet. But as seems to be tradition, I didn't get all of them. Anyway, instead of needing 50 rings and a checkpoint to access the new special stages, doing so will allow you to teleport to one of 3 random bonus games where you can get some extra rings or lives. In order to access a special stage now, you'll find these giant rings hidden throughout each level, which further encourages exploration. And this is where my fundamental issue with Sonic 3 materializes. The game explicitly tells you to explore, but I don't feel there's enough time in many levels to do so. Some of the levels in 3 and Knuckles are goddamn marathons, with both acts having boss fights now instead of just Act 2. In the first act, you'll fight a robot created by Eggman, and then in Act 2, you'll fight the Doctor himself. The boss fights themselves aren't a problem, of course, the time limit is. See, in the Genesis Sonic games, if you take longer than 10 minutes to complete a level, you lose a life. I also never mentioned this in the previous reviews because I honestly forgot it was a thing. It never happens to me in Sonic 1 or 2, but in this game it happened to me a couple times and almost happened a few more. Now by all means you can chalk that up to me being least familiar with Sonic 3's level layouts out of the whole trilogy. But the fact remains that the game demands that you explore to actually finish the game without giving you the freedom to do so, and that's in my opinion a design flaw specific to this game. Many acts absolutely overstay their welcome. This game loves to reuse entire chunks of level 2, 3, maybe even 4 times with very marginal changes. It enjoys going absolutely bonkers on random gimmicks like the spinning top in Marble Garden Zone, or in set pieces where the game plays itself, taking what I felt was a positive in Sonic 2 and stretching it way more than I'd like here. It likes to do this whole endlessly repeating thing in some chunks of level until you make the required jump, which just served to eat time. It just kills me having to replay levels and sit through all of that again if I get a game over. But I will say, thank God this game has a save feature so I don't have to start the whole game over if that happens, and lose all my Emerald progress, or, just put in the level select code and start where I left off like everybody else does, but still. When a level is good in 3 and Knuckles, it's up there with my favorite in the franchise. Sky Sanctuary, for example, might just be my favorite stage start to finish out of any 2D Sonic game. And Lava Reef? Great! This game is a perfectly seared steak, but made at the local diner. When you get a good bite, it's phenomenal, but there's so much fat around the edges that I'm left wanting at times. Actually, this improves over time too. I find myself enjoying the levels from Sonic and Knuckles far more often than I do the ones from Sonic 3, although Flying Battery can eat a bag of Sonic 3's half gets so caught up in speed at times that I'm starting to feel like the game is controlling itself and fighting me more than I'm really playing it. Perhaps I'll lighten up on the game the more I go back to it. That's what happened with both Sonic 1 and 2 during this retrospective. But I'm left feeling disappointed by the actual gameplay on the levels as it stands right now. That's an absolute shame because to me, the mechanics are the best in the trilogy and I'm left feeling like I don't get to make use of them. 3 and Knuckles feels like almost a precursor to the problems Sonic would face in his 3D adventures. So much inward focus on those things like set pieces and new ways to look cool that it loses its way. If I were rating these games separately in terms of gameplay, Knuckles blows 3 out of the water right now, and in fact Knuckles would almost get a Golden Bolt by itself if it weren't on the shorter side. But the two were designed as one game, and I plan on scoring them as one game. I'm certain that as I master the shortcuts in the 3 half, my opinion of the whole package will only improve. That's especially true looking at the sheer amount of variety with 3 playable characters and almost twice as many levels as either Sonic 1 or 2. However, because these flaws are present to me as somebody who's already played Sonic 3 before, they're very much worth noting since new players will run into them for sure. I'm going to give the gameplay for the entire package a silver bolt. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is beautiful, and I don't just mean visually. I don't just mean the soundtrack, which now has unique tracks for both Act 1 and Act 2 in each zone. I mean that this game has perhaps the most cohesion from level to level that I've ever seen out of a 2D platformer. That statement is so impressive to me since each act feels wildly different from its companion. Between or during acts, there's usually a harsh transition. Angel Island is set on fire by Eggman's robots, for example. This makes every single act feel super distinct. I may not be a big fan of Sandopolis because it goes on for centuries, but I absolutely love seeing the level backgrounds go from well lit to pitch black over time. Even better, the levels themselves actually transition from one to the next. Whereas in Sonic 1 and 2, when you finish an act, it just cut right to the next level, in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, one level starts right where you just ended. It makes the whole world feel real and significant. Even between zones, the game gives you a transition scene, such as when Sonic is knocked down a waterfall to transition from Angel Island to Hydrocity, and it's amazing. And yes, I just pronounced it Hydrocity. Not Hydrocity, not Hydrocity, I'm gonna be different. This gets better and better as the game goes on, and in fact, I feel that Sonic & Knuckles in particular has some of the best thematic design of any game ever. Each act and each zone, both in its foreground and its background, both visually and its music, feels like a natural progression from the last, a perfect escalation. The game tells its story without saying a word, without a single text box, and yet I was totally engrossed every step of the way. I'm amazed, absolutely amazed that this exists. It's perfect, and I do not just throw around the word perfect. Even if I may not be a fan of the actual level design and the repetitive gameplay segments of some of Sonic 3's levels, the escalation from zone to zone feels great. So much effort went into making this the best looking Sonic game to date, and by God it is. It still might be 2 decades later. But obviously the game looks good. It's the most visually impressive Genesis game I can think of, even adding tiny details such as Angel Island's second half warping from the heat. And obviously it sounds good. The Sonic 3 half was composed in part by one of the greatest musicians to ever walk the earth, and the Knuckles half doesn't slouch at all either. I don't really feel the need to state the obvious. If you've been watching the video, you can see how good it looks, and if you've been listening, you've heard the fantastic music in the background. Looking at how far above and beyond Sonic 3 and Knuckles goes to present the best Sonic game, I have no other words besides, again, perfect. And that's why I'm giving the presentation of this game the first ever Platinum Bolt. I think it's clear by now, but I personally preferred Knuckles heavily despite this being the first time I've ever played past the first level of that game. However, I still absolutely recommend you play this game as a whole, not in halves. Actually, I recommend you play Sonic 2, 3, and Knuckles consecutively because these three releases form the true Genesis Sonic trilogy to me. Sonic 1 is more of a prologue here. If you want the games on the original Genesis hardware, it's gonna run you a decent amount. But if you're okay with picking them up on PC, you can pick up all three Sonic games I've reviewed for this marathon for $15 total. They're also available on PSN, Xbox Live, and in various physical collections on these and older systems, although Sonic 3 and Knuckles is oddly absent from PSN. Just be careful when you're looking, as some of the collections don't allow lock-on between Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles, meaning you're not actually getting the full experience. And trust me, the full experience is worth it here. And that, ladies and gentlemen, closes the book on our classic Sonic Marathon. But we're not done with marathons just yet. See, it's a certain Pink Puffball's 25th birthday, and I was never really a huge Kirby guy. So I figured, why not give it a shot? So join me next week when we start the Kirby Marathon. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to hit the like button, and if you want to see more, make sure you hit that subscribe button too.